The unblemished drone of the examination room deep within the orbiting Mira health cruiser was suddenly interrupted by the sharp release of the pressurized hatch. Exel, senior healer of the craft, adjusted their sensory filaments anxiously as the human stumbled into the space, his limb dangling at an odd angle, a dark red line trailing behind him. "Please, someone tell me you have wraps," the human mumbled. His pallid countenance was strained yet his tone disturbingly nonchalant. Exel had studied humans in depth, academia, virtual scenarios, albeit this was their initial real aid encounter. They flinched slightly at the view of the open laceration. Thin muscle sheens shone unsettlingly under ripped flesh, and the throbbing scarlet liquid, a clear indicator of severe circulatory collapse in nearly every known being, pulsed in time with his heartbeats. "Magnificent radiance above," Ziri stammered, directing their aides forth. "Containment grid now." The human frowned. "Restraints? That seems excessive, it's merely a minor cut." He collapsed onto the analysis chair, his boots scraping the polished surface. "Just a minor cut," Ziri repeated, their voice escalating in a rare display of emotion. "You're hemorrhaging, remain still or you." Zell's admonishment ceased as the human nonchalantly pressed on his limb using the ragged edge of his jacket. "Calm down, medic. I'll mend all right. This sort of incident occurs frequently. Once, I had a nail driven right through my..." "Quiet," Exel commanded. Their diagnostic aids, pale green creatures with slender digits, buzzed around nervously as they arranged tools. "Begin prompt blood management protocol. Sedation, tissue regeneration field." "Ah," the human lifted his other arm. "I don't need sedation, just fix this quickly. I need to return to my craft, we're contending with a stellar emission, and you've nearly cut off your limb," Ziri interjected. "Such an injury would debilitate a Terran battle Leviathan for seasons." "I'm no Terran." "Leviathan," the human replied lightly, introducing himself as Quarry. "Pleasure to meet you, Ziri." Zell's filaments quivered. This wasn't unfolding smoothly. "Quarry," they asserted, struggling to keep composed, "if you do not permit us to stabilize your wound, you will enter hypovolemic shock and expire." Quarry offered a skewed grin. "Been there, didn't perish. You've got about 5 minutes before I pass out though, so perhaps expedite?" Exel motioned frantically at their aides, who rushed to encase the wound as their instruments sprang to life. Quarry's laid-back demeanor persisted. "Humans," Ziri muttered. "Hey, don't judge us until you try us," Quarry quipped, grimacing slightly as an aide started cleansing the injury. The sight of the medical team's delicate fingers soaked in human blood did little to reassure Ziri. "Doesn't that hurt?" Exel inquired, baffled. "Oh, it's excruciating," Quarry admitted, his tone almost cheerful. "But pain is just pain, you manage it." Exel leaned back, momentarily struck by silence. Pain, they pondered, was universally a sign of distress, yet here was this human speaking of it as if it were a mere annoyance. As the medical team operated, Quarry entertained them with stories of similar injuries. "There was this time on Altrain IX," he began, his speech slightly slurred from the blood loss, "received a plasma burn right across my thigh. That hurt, but I patched it up with some bonding foam, and we completed the mission, no trouble." "No trouble," Ziri echoed faintly, their usually precise movements wavering. "Do all humans dismiss their mortality so casually?" "No," Quarry said, grinning. "Some of us are very cautious. I just don't have the luxury of time." The containment grid sealed the wound with a quiet hum, and the aides progressed to weaving the severed tissues together using advanced biomesh. Quarry barely reacted, his attention instead on the overhead lights. "Ever notice how these resemble old Earth street lamps?" "No? Just me?" Zell's patience snapped. "You are in critical condition, and you comment on light fixtures?" "Well, yes," Quarry responded, his smile broadening. "It helps me stay distracted. Besides, you all are doing an excellent job. Nearly finished, right?" One of the aides chirped affirmatively. The bleeding had ceased, and the limb was well on its way to functional recovery, but Quarry's vital signs were alarmingly weak. "We must administer plasma infusions immediately," Exel declared. "All right," Quarry replied, attempting to stand. He swayed dangerously before gripping the chair. "Like I said, stellar emission to consider." Ziri physically blocked him, their larger form looming over the human. "You will remain seated," they commanded. "If you depart in this state, you will collapse within minutes." Quarry looked up at Ziri, his expression a mix of annoyance and appreciation. Doc, I value your concern, but humans are more resilient than you assume. Resilience, Zeely snapped, is not a substitute for blood volume. But before they could debate further, a crackling voice came through Corey's communicator. Corey, status? We need you back here now. Corey pressed a button on his wrist device. Almost ready, just patching up a scratch. Ziri nearly screamed in frustration. Scratch? What kind of being considers this severe injury a mere scratch? Exel stared at Corey as if he had just denied the laws of physics. You will not exit this room, they asserted. Your body is functioning at critically reduced capacity. Another moment of exertion and you will collapse. Corey waved them off, testing his newly repaired limb with a tentative flex. The biomesh held firm, though the area was discolored with bruises. Feels alright, a bit tender, but I'll survive. Surviving is precisely what you jeopardize by leaving, Zeely warned, their filaments curling in agitation. You're not indestructible. Never claimed I was, Corey retorted with a lopsided smile, still in a rush. The assistant medics chirped anxiously, pointing at the monitor displaying his declining vital signs. They were dropping steadily, his blood pressure nearing catastrophic failure. Exel acted swiftly, activating the chamber's emergency protocol to lock the doors. Corey raised an eyebrow. Did you just imprison me? Indeed, Ziri affirmed. If your kind insists on such reckless disregard for life, it will not be under my supervision. I am bound by the Intergalactic Medical Code to ensure the survival of all patients under my care, even the suicidally stubborn ones. Corey groaned, sinking back into the chair. Doc, I understand your worry, but I've been through this before. Trust me, I recover quickly. Recovery, Zeely retorted, their tone laced with frustration, is not a recognized medical phenomenon. What you describe as recovery is likely an abnormal physiological reaction to human adaptability. Corey interjected, flashing a grin that caused Zell's frills to twitch with irritation. You'd be surprised what we can endure. A bit of blood loss? Peef. I knew someone who walked half a mile with a metal rod through him. Enough. Ziri interjected, raising a trembling filament. Your stories do not change biological facts. You are deteriorating rapidly. As if on cue, Corey's head lolled back slightly, his complexion visibly paler. For a moment, even his confidence seemed to waver. Okay, he conceded, his voice softer now. Perhaps sitting for another minute wouldn't hurt. Finally, Exel muttered, gesturing to their aides to prepare a plasma transfusion. They moved with meticulous precision, the room buzzing with soft, efficient hums. You should have consented to this treatment immediately. It will restore your blood volume and stabilize your vitals. Yeah, Corey said, wincing as a slender, needle-like device was inserted into his arm. Do your thing, Doc. But after this, I've got to get moving. Ziri leaned in, their glowing yellow eyes narrowing. You seem to misunderstand. You will not be departing this facility until I deem you fit. Corey smirked weakly. Good luck with that. Humans are quite adept at slipping away. One of the aides emitted a high-pitched whistle, alerting Exel to an anomaly. The plasma infusion wasn't flowing as expected. The human circulatory system was behaving erratically. Zelly's filaments froze mid-motion. Explain, they demanded of the assistant, whose translucent green skin darkened in confusion. The diagnostic screen displayed a troubling pattern. Corey's body was compensating for the blood loss by constricting vessels and redistributing flow in ways that baffled Mira medical knowledge. Your biology, Exel said slowly, staring at Corey as if he were a live bomb, is defying our intervention. Defying? Corey laughed weakly. Nah, that's just normal. We've got this whole homeostasis thing going on. Body figures out how to keep itself going. This, Zeely said, pointing a filament toward the screen, is not normal by any galactic standard. Your heart rate should be failing, your blood pressure should be plummeting, yet your body is cheating death. Cheating death, Corey finished for them, his grin returning faintly. Like I said, human adaptability. It's kind of our thing. Exel recoiled, staring at the stubborn human with a mix of awe and dismay. Do you comprehend how improbable your survival is? By all metrics, you should have expired minutes ago. Well, I didn't, Corey said, shrugging his functioning shoulder. Guess I'm full of surprises. Zeely leaned closer, their frills stiff with determination. You are a statistical aberration, and I refuse to lose you because of your reckless actions. You will comply with all medical directives from this point forward. Sure, Doc, Corey said lightly. Whatever you say. Ziri didn't trust his tone. Humans were maddeningly elusive. They needed a strategy, something to ensure compliance without resorting to outright sedation, a last measure, given how unpredictably humans reacted to alien anesthetics. As they pondered, Corey suddenly perked up, his hand darting to his communicator. The voice from before crackled through again. Corey, the flare's nearing. We're running out of time. Exel glared. You will inform your crew that you are incapacitated. Yeah, no, Corey replied, his tone almost apologetic. I'll tell them I'm fine. Before Zeely could object, the human was already tampering with the communicator. The audacity. Zell's frills flared in frustration. If this human believed he could flout medical protocol, he had grossly underestimated Mira resolve. Ziri moved swiftly, their filaments darting to the console. With a few precise inputs, they activated the chamber's comm scrambler, cutting off Corey's outgoing transmission. The human blinked in confusion before turning an amused look toward Exel. Did you just jam my signal? He asked, the notion both amusing and slightly annoying. Indeed, Zeely replied. You have forfeited your right to independent communication by proving yourself incapable of rational self-preservation. Corey leaned back, eyebrows raised. That's intense. Intense measures are warranted when dealing with patients who lack basic survival instincts, Ziri retorted. Now sit still while we finish stabilizing your internal systems. The human sighed dramatically but complied. Meanwhile, the medical team worked in a flurry, administering a more compatible plasma substitute and stabilizing his vitals with auxiliary support. Despite the severity of the situation, Corey seemed more interested in the glowing medical tools than his own precarious state. What's that thing do? He asked, nodding toward a sleek device emitting faint pulses of blue light. It recalibrates cellular cohesion, Ziri replied curtly. Stop talking. Corey frowned thoughtfully. Cool. Could I get one of those for the ship? Seems handy. Zell's filaments twitched. This is not a trade negotiation. This is a medical procedure. Relax, Doc. I'm just making conversation. You are losing blood faster than we can replace it. Cease your frivolities. Despite Ziri's exasperation, the human's condition began to stabilize. The plasma infusion was finally accepted by his resilient body, and the wound, though still raw, showed signs of rapid recovery. Ziri's aides let out soft whistles of relief as the diagnostic screen displayed improved readings. There, Exel said, allowing a measure of calm to return to their voice. Your condition is no longer critical. Corey gave a tired thumbs up. See, told you I'd be fine. Ziri's frills flattened in disbelief. Fine? You were minutes from death. Your capacity for understatement is a coping mechanism. Coping mechanism, Corey interrupted, grinning weakly. We humans have a lot of those. Keeps things light, you know. Exel stared at him, trying to process the casual deflection. You treat your fatal injuries as inconveniences? Pretty much, Corey replied. You should see us during flu season. Flus? Zeely asked, confused. What is that? It's when everyone gets sick and complains a lot. We just power through with soup and tissues. You survive mass illness with soup? Ziri inquired incredulously. Corey laughed, then winced at the strain on his injured limb. Okay, maybe not just soup, but yeah, we manage. Humans are tough, Doc. You'll get used to it. Ziri doubted they ever would. The very idea of such recklessness was antithetical to their meticulous approach to health and safety. Yet, there was no denying the human's uncanny resilience. Even now, as the infusion finished and the wound continued to heal, Corey seemed more interested in joking than resting. The communicator chirped again, bypassing the scrambler this time. It was a different voice, calm but urgent. Corey, flare activity is accelerating. We need your status now. Exel sighed. There was no way to prevent this. Stubborn human from responding, and they doubted any threat of restraint would deter him. Before Corey could speak, Exel activated their own communicator. This is Exel, chief healer of the Mira health cruiser, they announced. Your crew member remains unfit for duty. He requires extensive recovery and will not be released until further notice. There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, the voice replied, that's not really up to you, is it? Ziri stiffened. It is entirely up to me. I am responsible for his survival. Doc, Corey said, interrupting with a weary smile. Appreciate the concern, but I've got to go. Can't leave my team hanging. You are incapable of rational decision-making, Zeely protested. Your continued defiance is why we survive, Corey finished, struggling to his feet. He swayed slightly, then steadied himself with a grin. Thanks for the patch job, Doc. I owe you one. Exel moved to block him, but Corey's movements were surprisingly swift for someone recently near death. He grabbed his jacket from the chair, wincing as he shrugged it on over the freshly treated limb. Stay put, Exel demanded. Okay, Corey replied, heading toward the airlock. Solar flare, remember? Ziri's assistants chirped in alarm, their attempts to restrain him failing as he dodged with an infuriatingly casual grace. The medic stood frozen, torn between outrage and reluctant admiration. Unbelievable, Exel muttered as Corey disappeared through the airlock, leaving a trail of half-healed chaos in his wake. Humans are unbelievable. One of the assistants whistled tentatively, pointing at the monitor. Corey's vitals, though erratic, remained stable. It was as if his body had decided it simply wouldn't fail. Exel sank into a chair, exhausted by the encounter. Adaptable, they murmured, almost to themselves. Reckless, stubborn, infuriatingly adaptable. The hum of the cruiser returned to its usual rhythm, but Exel couldn't shake the strange mixture of frustration and awe that lingered in Corey's absence. The Mira frigate's medbay was finally quiet, but Ziri couldn't settle. The entire encounter with Corey gnawed at their meticulous mind. Despite decades of experience treating species from across the galaxy, nothing had prepared them for the paradox that was humanity. Monitor his trajectory, Exel ordered, their voice sharper than usual. I want his vital signs tracked until he reaches his vessel. I refuse to have him perish after such obstinate theatrics. One of the assistants chirped obediently, activating a distant scanner. The readout displayed Corey's faintly flickering biosignature moving away from the frigate, his vitals stabilizing, though still precariously low. Exel stared at the screen. What kind of creature survives such self-inflicted chaos, and why do they insist on compounding it? Meanwhile, Corey staggered into the docking bay of his ship, Rustbucket. The name fit, as the vessel looked like it had seen better centuries. Its hull was battered, its engines held together with makeshift repairs, and its landing struts creaked ominously. When Corey stepped aboard, his crewmates rushed to meet him. Corey, what the hell happened? Shouted Rin, the ship's pilot and designated voice of reason. She was a wiry woman with a perpetually furrowed brow, now deepened by concern as she noticed the crude wraps covering his limb. Nothing serious, Corey said, rushing past her. Got into a little scrape. The Mira med team patched me up. A scrape? Rin repeated, her voice rising. You look like you lost a fight with an industrial shredder, and you're still pale as, Rin, Corey interrupted, giving her a tired smile. Not now. Solar flare incoming, remember? We've got 8 minutes before the worst of it. But you're in no shape, save it, Corey said, collapsing into the co-pilot seat. I'll be fine. Let's just get this crate moving. How are you not dead? Rin asked, exasperated. Guess I'm lucky, Corey replied, flipping switches on the console. His movements were slower than usual, his face still pale, but his resolve never wavered. Torvik snorted. Lucky? More like insane. That too, Corey admitted as the rust bucket rumbled to life. Corey focused on the controls, ignoring the growing pain in his limb. Every instinct screamed at him to rest, to let his body recover, but there was no time for that. The flare was barreling toward them, and if they didn't leave the system now, they'd be roasted alive. The ship's thrusters fired, and the crew braced as the vessel lurched into motion. Corey gritted his teeth against the strain. Every jolt sent fresh waves of pain through his injured limb, but he forced himself to focus. They were almost clear. Engines are at 95%, Torvik called out. We're cutting it close. Corey clenched the controls tighter. Close is good enough. Just keep it steady. The ship's warning alarms blared as solar radiation surged behind them, but Corey barely flinched. He guided the rust bucket through the turbulence with a calm that baffled his crew. Finally, they broke free, the flare dissipating as they cleared the system's edge. The alarms fell silent, leaving only the hum of the engines and the collective sighs of relief. Piece of cake, Corey said, leaning back in his seat. Rin shot him a glare. You're unbelievable. That's what the Mira medic said, Corey replied with a smirk. Then, without warning, his head lolled to the side, and he slumped forward in his seat. "Corey!" Rin shouted, catching him before he fell to the floor. Torvik cursed, rushing over to check his vitals. "He's out cold, pulse is weak. What the hell did those medics do? Probably kept him alive longer than he deserved," Rin muttered, lifting Corey with surprising gentleness. "Help me get him to the infirmary." Torvik grumbled but complied, dragging a portable monitor along as they laid Corey on the ship's medical cot. His breathing grew steadier, though he remained unconscious. "What now?" Torvik asked. "Now," Rin said, "we let him rest. And when he wakes up, I'm going to kill him for scaring us like that." Torvik snorted. "If he wakes up, he will," Rin said firmly. "Humans are too stubborn to die." Back on the Mira frigate, Exel was watching Corey's faint biosignature stabilize. Against all odds, the human had made it again. Zelly's frustration was tempered by a grudging respect. They had studied hundreds of species, each with its strengths and vulnerabilities, but none so confounding as humans. Their capacity for survival bordered on the absurd. "Drive," one of the assistants said hesitantly. "Shall we archive this case as a unique anomaly?" "No," Ziri said, shaking their frills. "It is not an anomaly. It is simply what humans are." They stared at the fading dot on the monitor, a strange thought creeping into their mind. Perhaps there was more to learn from this reckless, maddening species than they had ever imagined. A week later, Ziri was still trying to make sense of the bizarre events. The human, Corey, had left an indelible impression on them, not just his reckless behavior but the sheer audacity of his survival. It was an affront to everything Exel thought they understood about biology. They replayed the encounter in their mind as they reviewed data from the human's treatment. His vital signs during the procedure had fluctuated wildly, defying medical logic. His tissue regeneration response was inconsistent yet rapid, as if his body operated under rules no Mira scientist had ever documented. "Drive," one of the assistants chirped, interrupting Zelly's thoughts. "There's an incoming transmission from the human vessel identified as the Rust Bucket." Ziri's frills stiffened. "Patch it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing Corey's grinning face. His complexion was healthier now, his limb fully bandaged. But mobile. In the background, faint sounds of machinery clanking and crew chatter filled the air. "Hey, Doc," Corey said cheerfully. "Thought I'd check in, like a good patient." Exel resisted the urge to sigh. "You are not a good patient, Corey. You are a nightmare." "Fair," Corey replied, his grin unfaltering. "But I'm alive, thanks to you, so credit where it's due." "Yeah," Exel studied him carefully, their irritation tempered by curiosity. "What do you want, Corey? Surely you didn't call just to praise my medical expertise." "Partly that," Corey admitted, leaning back in his chair. "But mostly to say thanks, and to offer a little apology." "Apology?" Ziri echoed, their frills tilting in skepticism. "For what?" "For bolting out of your medbay," Corey said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know it probably wasn't cool, but I had to get back to my crew." "You understand, right?" Zelly's tendrils curled thoughtfully. "I understand your reasoning, but not your recklessness. Do you even realize how close you came to death?" "Close doesn't count," Corey replied with a shrug. "I made it, and look, I'm healing up just fine." Exel leaned closer to the screen. "Your species' penchant for surviving the impossible is unsettling. It is as though your biology thrives on adversity." Corey chuckled. "Yeah, we're weird like that. You should see what happens when we don't sleep for a couple of days. Total chaos, but somehow we still get stuff done." Exel stared at him, equal parts horrified and intrigued. "How do you explain such behavior? Is it cultural?" "Partly," Corey said, scratching his chin. "But a lot of it's just biology. Humans adapt. It's what we do. Throw us into a crisis, and we'll find a way out, usually by breaking something." Zeely frowned. "That is not a viable long-term survival strategy." "Works for us," Corey said. Then, with a more serious tone, he added, "Look, I get that it probably drove you nuts, but I'm really glad you patched me up. You saved my life, Doc, so thanks." For a moment, Exel didn't know how to respond. The human's sincerity was disarming, even if his methods were maddening. "You are welcome," Zeely said finally. "But I must insist you refrain from such recklessness in the future." "No promises," Corey replied with a grin. "But I'll try to keep it interesting." The screen blinked off, leaving Ziri alone with their thoughts. They sat in silence for a moment before speaking aloud to no one in particular. Interesting, they muttered. That is one way to describe it. Weeks passed, and Ziri found themselves delving deeper into human physiology and psychology. The Mira data banks were woefully sparse on the subject. Likely because most alien species avoided humans altogether. Their unpredictability was seen as a liability, their adaptability as chaos incarnate. Yet Exel couldn't shake the fascination. They began compiling a report based on their encounter, Corey's bizarre recovery, and his species' unorthodox survival strategies. The report grew into a comprehensive study, filled with questions that demanded answers.